Number 45 to now 47, Donald Trump promises big changes for America in his second term.
This will truly be the golden age of America.
In Washington state, President Trump received a larger share of the vote than he did in 2020, and he enters the White House with a new MAGA mandate. Decisions made during his presidency will be felt in our region, from immigration to the economy and jobs. We're digging into the Trump effect, Washington state in a second term. What will the next 4 years look like? And can the president accomplish his agenda?
He's only the second man to ever win the presidency twice in two separate terms, and his administration seems poised to hit the ground running in a way we did not see the first time around. Thanks for being with us for a King 5 Plus special, The Trump Effect, Washington State in a second term. I'm Jake Whittenberg. Thanks for the privilege of your time. Our King 5 analysts are standing by to help us sort through what the people of Washington might expect to see in the next 4 years. Rob McKenna is former Washington Attorney General and Republican candidate for governor, standing by virtually this morning. And Gary Locke served 2 terms as governor for the state of Washington as a Democrat, also serving as U.S. Secretary of Commerce under President Barack Obama, as well as U.S. Ambassador to China. Gentlemen, let's get to it. I want to first look at the election results. A quick reminder of where we stand. Kamala Harris won the state's 12 electoral votes, a margin of 57 to 39%. But Trump managed to gain a larger share of the vote in 2024 than he did in 2020 and in 2016. In fact, Washington state reliably blew year over year, but this election saw the electorate shift to the right compared to previous elections. Gary, I want to start with you. What do you make of this slight shift to the right in Washington state? What do you mean?
Well, I think you have to look at the different candidates because Governor Ferguson actually won with a larger margin than most Democratic governors have in the past. But President-elect Trump, won with only about 0.3% more than he did when he was first elected. So I'm not really sure that it's a shift to the right.
Yeah, albeit the smallest sort of shift you could possibly get. But indicative of maybe where things are headed, Rob McKenna, what do you think about the sort of inroads that Donald Trump made in the 2024 election?
Well, I think that what we saw in Washington state is that red counties became even more red and blue counties became a deeper shade of blue. As we see, we saw more voters turning to Trump in those rural counties and Democrats solidifying gains in urban areas, with some exceptions. There were pockets of Seattle, for example, where there were increases in support for Trump, such as the International District, perhaps reflecting concerns over public safety. So overall, with slight gains, for Trump, moving things a little bit to the right, I guess you could say it was kind of status quo for the presidential race, as Gary points out. Ferguson won with a healthy margin. So you also have to look at the state House and the state Senate, where Democrats made some gains, in part due to the fact that Republicans in several races nominated people who were simply too far to the right to be a good fit for their particular district, and they lost. And these were seats, in some cases, where incumbent Republicans were exiting, and the Republicans were unable to hold on to the seat because the person they put up just wasn't a good fit. So, looking up and down the ballot, I think it was an election was pretty good for Democrats. And, Republicans have to reevaluate what they're going to do to be successful in Washington state elections in an era when Trump is in the White House.
The state feels so much more polarized today than it ever has been. You get that sense compared to when you ran for governor?
Well, certainly there are much more partisan bickering in the state legislature, as there is in the United States Congress. And so while the margins are very close, and what's interesting is that when many of these elected officials are working in nonpartisan positions, whether it's city council or county council or school board, you will not know who's a Democrat versus a Republican. But when they go into either Olympia or Washington, D.C., suddenly it becomes very partisan, and there's a reluctance to even compromise on common sense solutions.
Identity politics also didn't seem to be working for the Democrats this time around. It didn't seem to really stick with a lot of the Democratic voters. I don't know, Rob, if you have anything to say about that. It's just a strategy that didn't seem to work the way I think Democrats expected.
Well, I think that's right. And you certainly see that in the national figures. It might help explain some of the results in our state as well. It was striking, as we discussed on election night at King 5, how the top 5 issues for Trump voters and the top 5 issues for Biden or Kamala Harris voters were entirely different. And the top 5 issues included immigration, the economy, and so forth, ended up being those that helped Trump carry the popular vote. The first time a Republican president has done that in some time. I think that was echoed in Washington State as well, where voters were very focused on public safety concerns and other kind of meat and potato issues, and might have turned away somewhat from the social justice focused issues that progressives have been pushing for some time.
Let's hit on that issue of immigration that you just mentioned there, Rob. Immigration, a top priority for President-elect Trump. His new administration intends to make radical changes to immigration policy. He promises to deport millions of illegal immigrants across the nation. We'll have to see what the impact may be here in Western Washington. New Attorney General Nick Brown tells me his office is ready to respond.
From my perspective, the second Trump administration presents some unique challenges for us. There's been a lot of work that's been happening over the last year by this office to look through all of the things that President Trump was saying on the campaign trail.
That also includes what's being said in the 900-page right-wing wish list called Project 2025. In it, conservatives call for the overhaul of immigration policy.
There are things within that document that give me great concern. Things like ending birthright citizenship, which has been part of our constitutional principle for generations now, never once challenged. The idea that you would simply no longer follow this bedrock constitutional principle is very concerning to me.
Then there's the concern over mass deportations, a promise Trump already appears to pursue. The Migration Policy Institute estimates there are 250,000 Washingtonians who don't have legal status in the U.S. Most are from Mexico, and migrant workers are the backbone of the state's agricultural industry.
What I am concerned about, of course, is that we are treating people fairly under the law, whether they are citizens or not. If you are undocumented and living in Washington, you still have legal rights.
Under U.S. immigration law, local police can be deputized to enforce federal laws and assist with any deportation.
So we've seen this movie before, and he's talking about doing this now.
But John Urquhart, the former sheriff of King County, believes there is little to no chance that any Washington sheriff or police chief would allow local resources to assist with mass deportations.
Local police job is really very simple. Reduce crime and the fear of crime. People to report crime. We need people to be good witnesses, to report evidence, all those kinds of things. If we don't have that, we can't solve crimes. And if people are afraid to come to us because they think we are going to turn them over to ICE, then we're not going to be able to solve the crimes that we need to solve to keep the community safe. It's really just as simple as that.
The new Attorney General says now is a wait-and-see moment for the state of Washington.
It is not the state government's job to enforce immigration laws. That is a federal priority and a federal responsibility, but we need to be very mindful about how they go doing that.
Gary, what concerns you the most about some of the policies that Donald Trump seems to be putting forward?
Well, as mentioned in the broadcast, President-elect Trump really wants to say that if you're born in the United States of parents who are not citizens here, you're not automatically a U.S. citizen, and that's a violation, contrary to our U.S. Constitution of many centuries. I mean, it's bedrock principle that any person born in the United States is a United States citizen. The other thing about the mass deportations, I mean, there's obviously bipartisan agreement that if a person is arrested who's undocumented, here illegally, but arrested for a very serious crime, that person should be deported. But to deport millions of people will be very, very difficult. It will take away from the duties and the focus of law enforcement solving crimes, but also more importantly, we don't have the capacity in the state of Washington, any of our jails or federal institutions to house even 10,000 undocumented individuals who might be rounded up by the federal government.
Yeah, the Tacoma Detention Center is packed full with thousands still waiting for their legal cases to proceed as well. Those the H-1B visas too as well. These tech companies rely on a lot of these visas to bring workers to the United States. That could be threatened.
And that's not; these are not illegal individuals. These are people who have been approved by the U.S. government to come. And the problem is that in many of our tech industries across the nation, and especially in the state of Washington, there are not enough people trained in engineering and the computer sciences to fill these jobs. So instead of hurting these companies by excluding needed high-tech skilled workers, I mean, we as a state and as a country need to be educating more of our own people into science and technology and computer sciences so that we don't have to rely on people from another country. But if our companies need them, they should be able to bring them in a legal way, which is what they do now, to ensure that our companies are growing, prospering, and therefore hiring even more people from the state of Washington.
Rob, former Attorney General Bob Ferguson famously sued Trump 99 times while he was in office. You were the Attorney General as a Republican. What would you be watching for right now, objectively, before the Trump administration gets in?
I think that the AGs around the country who are Democrats are getting organized and will be watching to see what executive orders the Trump administration issues that they believe are illegal or unconstitutional. I think the Trump administration is going to be much better prepared this time than they were coming in Trump's first term when they issued the Muslim travel ban and other executive orders that weren't very well thought out legally. So there will be litigation, I'm sure, challenging some of the efforts to deport people who are here who are undocumented. It remains to be seen how many such lawsuits there are, how successful they are, because we don't know exactly what Trump is going to order, and therefore we don't know whether the measures he's going to use really are subject to successful legal challenges. So that's a question mark. I think Trump's going to focus on closing down illegal immigration across the border, not just on deporting people who are already here. I think, as Gary said, he'll be focused, and his administration will be focused particularly on people who are here, who are undocumented, who have been accused of committing crimes or have been convicted of crimes. I think that'll be a big focus. There are logistical challenges, as Governor Locke and former Sheriff Urquhart pointed out, to mass deportations. And then on the H-1B visa issue, I mean, you're seeing a pretty deep divide in MAGA world between Elon Musk and the Silicon Valley allies of Trump on the one hand, and Steve O'Bannon and the isolationists on the other. So we'll see how that plays out. Trump seems to be favorable towards H-1B visas, and as Gary pointed out, we have a need for those in the tech industry. Although others have pointed out that some people in the tech industry who are American-born are being displaced by folks with H-1B visas. So that's not entirely without controversy.
Really a delicate political situation, as you alluded to there, Rob, about sort of how Trump is having to please both sides now with all that he's sort of promised. I want to move ahead to the economy a bit here as well. President-elect Donald Trump calling tariffs the greatest thing ever invented. It is a word that could have huge ramifications here in our state. Tariffs are essentially import taxes, charging foreign countries more money to send their goods to America in an effort to try to incentivize manufacturing here on U.S. soil. Mr. Trump has proposed charging Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff and up to 60% tariffs on China. Nonpartisan analysts by economists found that these tariffs could cost a typical household between $1,700 and $6,000 additional dollars per year. But there's reason to expect a broader effect in Washington state, too, in terms of building. The Washington Council on International Trade points out those three countries are our biggest trading partners, especially China, which in 2023 traded goods valued at more than $20 billion through Washington state. That's 30% of all of the value of the goods imported and exported through the ports of Seattle and Tacoma. The Trade Council also suggests that tariffs can trigger inflation, supply chain disruptions, job losses, and retaliatory tariffs. And if there was one other point, it is the housing crisis in Washington state. Last year, the Biden administration had the U.S. tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber nearly double. President Trump threatening to double that again if he takes office. The Building Industry Association of Washington says that could further stifle home building in our state, where supply is already among the worst in the nation.
We would prefer to see the tariffs stay where they are or not be increased. That certainly doesn't help, and we're trying to communicate that to the Trump administration at the national level.
Greg Lane with the BIAW says his team is working to loosen up regulations, which he says is the biggest driver of the housing crisis, but notes that the Trump administration needs to start thinking about the cost of lumber as well. So a lot here, Gary. I'm curious your thoughts on, as the ambassador to China, former ambassador, what will their response be to these tariffs, can you imagine?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that the tariffs are not against the countries. The tariffs are really like a sales tax that the purchasers of these items, the wholesalers, have to pay, whether it's Costco, Walmart, Home Depot, a Target. When they order something from around the world, if they have to pay a tariff, they pay that before they can receive the goods off the docks. And so if you're talking about a 60%, like a 60% sales tax that Target or Costco have to pay, they're going to pass it on to the consumer. And under Trump's first set of tariffs against China, various nonpartisan groups, economic groups, conservative groups, Wall Street Journal, the New York Fed, have said that the impact on the average American household was $800 extra.
Or more, yeah.
So obviously this is going to have huge ramifications and result in perhaps retaliation. And that we saw that the first time. China retaliated by putting tariffs on American goods going into China, which made it a lot more expensive. And so Chinese companies bought soybeans, not from America, but from Brazil. They didn't order Boeing airplanes, they ordered Airbus. And so there's a lot of political retaliation. China, Boeing did not have a single order for airplanes to China during the Trump administration because of those tariffs. And more than half of all Boeing airplanes are sold to overseas carriers.
Not to mention the materials that the supply chain needs to build those airplanes. Rob, is this going to pay off? It sounds like the idea, of course, is to try and get more manufacturing and work here on U.S. soil. Do you think it's going to work?
It may work at the margin. It really remains to be seen. There are other policies that have been implemented in the Biden administration with Republican support designed to bring chip manufacturing back to the United States, the CHIPS Act. So it would be good to see onshoring of the production of critical inputs like semiconductors. But it remains to be seen if that will be successful or not. The other thing to keep in mind about Trump's tariffs is that they're not just about economic policy, trying to onshore jobs and support American manufacturing. They're also, in his view, an important foreign policy tool and kind of a blunt instrument. One thing that China, Mexico, Canada have in common is that they rely heavily on exports for their economy and for economic growth. I mean, China is addressing its own economic challenges in part now by doubling down on exports. So tariffs become a really powerful weapon because, yes, there could be a trade war and it could hurt us if that happens, but we are less dependent as a nation on exports than those countries are. So he's going to use tariffs, for example, to pressure Mexico to close down the border, to stop as much illegal immigration as possible, to try to stop or crimp the flow of fentanyl into the country. He sees these tools as very, very powerful. It's also true to some extent with Europe, by the way, as he pressures NATO to spend more from European countries. So let's keep in mind the other foreign policy objectives he has as well as his economic goals when it comes to tariffs.
Gary, your knowledge just runs so deep in terms of relations with China, U.S.-China relations. Any more reason to fear China today than we did perhaps when you were in the ambassador?
Well, certainly the tensions, the relations between the United States and China are at an all-time low. And you're seeing many measures, even by the Biden administration and even initiated by the Trump administration, trying to attack some of these issues of China, unfair subsidies of their industries, inadequate protection of intellectual property, and obviously human rights issues. But we've been very limited in succeeding in changing China's trajectory or course. I mean, when the tariffs, for instance, when the tariffs were imposed on Chinese goods coming into the United States, many U.S. companies, what happened is that China then and the Chinese companies relocated their manufacturing facilities to other parts of Southeast Asia. And so the goods still came into the United States, but they weren't able to remove all of their supply chain to other countries, which is why the tariffs hurt American consumers when Costco, Target, Walmart buy those things. And so much of what we buy every single day is made in China.
Right.
So that really hurt the American consumer.
It'll be an interesting shift. In closing, gentlemen, I want to talk about where we're at politically here. Trump promising to hit the ground running when he gets back into the Oval Office, but he'll need to win over a divided Congress. Republicans are in full control of the House and Senate for the first time since 2019. In the House, Republicans have a razor-thin margin, 219 to 215. It is going to be difficult to really get anything done. Rob McKenna, I'm curious, politically, how do you navigate these waters? What do you expect to see?
I expect to see a very strong push from the Trump White House to pass as much of his agenda in the first 100 days as possible. That's crucial because midterm elections are always perilous for the party in the White House. There's a real risk they could lose control of the House in 2026. So I think that they'll try to get as much done, particularly in the first couple of quarters of 2025. I also think he'll, turn to the use of executive orders. That's been a growing trend. over the last 20 plus years, and we'll probably see more of it under Trump, just as we saw more of it under Biden. And we'll see how much of that withstands legal challenges when they are mounted. Some of those executive orders will amount to repealing Biden's executive orders, of course, but I think he'll use momentum coming in with Congress, and he'll put a lot of political pressure on them to get his agenda through, and then he'll use executive orders to accomplish what he can't accomplish legislatively.
Right, Gary, what do you think? You agree with that?
Oh, very much so. He'll try to package as much of his agenda into one or two major pieces of legislation and try to get it through. But some of the Republicans, for instance, do not want to raise the debt limit. And so he's trying to put all of these things into one package. And that's going to be hard. Most other pieces of legislation can be stopped in the Senate because there's a Senate rule that nothing comes up for a vote unless there are 60 members of the Senate willing to allow that, and the Republicans don't have 60 votes. So it's going to be really tough. And of course, Trump wants to repeal some of the Infrastructure Act and CHIP Act and energy legislation that Biden got through. But many of those pieces of legislation benefit Republican areas. All the incentives for solar manufacturing, clean energy manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing, those are all in Republican states and Republican districts. And so if Trump wants to repeal that, he may find some resistance from some of those Republican members of Congress.
It's going to be a delicate dance for sure. We'll be watching it all. Gary Locke, Rob McKenna, thanks you both for your extended coverage and your analysis of this all-important time. You can catch all of our coverage of President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration Monday, January 20th. Coverage begins at 7 a.m. We'll carry it live right here on King 5+. I'm Jake Whittenberg. Thank you for joining us in this special presentation of The Trump Effect, Washington State in a Second Term. You can count on King 5 to keep you covered with everything that's happening in the other Washington over the next 4 years and the impact here at home.